JavaScript math library. And the main reason that we're going to use the math library is to learn how to generate random numbers. We'll need random numbers quite a bit when we program games. They're used quite often in game development, and so it's important that we understand how to generate them early on in this course. So you can access the math library with the math keyword, capital M math, dot, and then the name of the method that you want to use from the math library. So there are lots of different methods that are available to you. In the documentation for this lesson, you can actually see there's a link to a list of math methods, but there are just a few that we're going to look at in this tutorial. So for example, the math library can do square roots. So it's math.sqrt, and then we want to put the number that we want to get the square root for in the parentheses. And what that's doing is it's calling the method sqrt from the class math, and then putting 49, this number, in as the parameter that's being passed to this class. Now, a lot of this terminology may be new to you, and that's okay. We'll explain this terminology and how all this works later on, but just know for right now that if you want to use math functions, you always have to start with this capital M math, and then use dot notation, and then the name of the method that you want to call, in this case sqrt. So if I log this, if I put this into a console log, and I press run, you can see that we have a problem. What is the problem? It didn't like my semicolon because the semicolon should always go at the end of the statement, and if you put a semicolon in the middle of a console log run like that, it basically thinks that the statement has ended, and it will crash with an error. But you see now it says console log math.square-root-49, and we've logged the number 7, which is the square root of the integer 49. We also have things like an absolute value. That's the ABS keyword. So if I put a negative 49 in there and I run this, I'll get a positive 49. And then we also have some methods that we can use to do some rounding. And this will become important as we move on here. So if I say 49.3456, and then I use the method math.ceil, S-C-E-I-L, think of that like math.ceiling. It's going to take this 49.3456 and it's going to round it up to the ceiling. And so when I press run, I'm going to get the number 50. See that? So 49.3456 rounded up is 50. And then if I type in math.floor, it's going to do what you would expect. If the ceiling rounds up, floor rounds down. And so we're going to end up with the number 49. Now these are going to be important for us as we look at a different math method, and that's the method math.random. Okay, so when I run this, math.random, you're going to see in my console a bunch of different random decimal numbers pop out. And these random decimal numbers are between 0 and 1. It does not include 1. It actually goes up to 0.9 repeating, but it starts at 0 and goes all the way to 0.9 repeating. And so this generates a random number for me between 0 and 0.9 repeating. Okay, so that's really nice. It gives me a nice random number, but how could I take this random number and turn it into a number that would be usable in a game? Well, the way that I do this is by expanding the range of the random number that I'm generating. So you see that the decimal place for this random number goes all the way out to about 16, 17 decimals. So I can pretty safely multiply this by a range. So I'm going to do math.random times 6. And now when I run, what I've done is I've taken that range of numbers between 0 and 1, and I've expanded it to be a range of numbers between 0 and 5 0.99999. Okay, so I'm going to run this. 1.1, 5.2, 0.3. You can see it's between 0 and 5.9 repeating. Okay, that's great. So now I've got numbers in a larger range. And basically, I use this multiplication to get whatever range I want. So if I want numbers between 0 and 9.9 repeating, I multiply by 10. You can see that 9.25, 8.16, etc. If I want like, I don't know, a 12-sided die, I would multiply by 12. Okay, but I'm still getting a lot of decimal numbers, and those aren't going to be as useful for me. And so what I can do here to create an integer number that might be useful for, say, something like a die roll is use another math function. I'm going to use math.floor and apply it to my math.random times 6. Now watch, when I do that, now I get a random integer between 0, getting a lot of 3s, 0 and 5. Okay, and that's because I have 6 integers in my span, right? I start with 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are 6 integers. Okay, so now I've got my 6 integers, but a normal 6-sided die doesn't give you numbers between 0 and 5. It gives you numbers between 1 and 6. So what I need to do then is take this math.floor mathrandom times 6 and add 1 to it. And now what I've done is I've taken that span, 0 through 5, and I've shifted it over 1. And now it's a span between 1 and 6. So if I run this, see, I get 1, see, I get 6. So this will function just like a 6-sided die in my program. So I can actually, instead of logging this out, I could actually set this to a variable for a die roll, and I would get a random die roll between 1 and 6. If I wanted to change the number of faces on my die, say I wanted a 12-sided die if I'm playing D&D, or if I wanted even like a smaller die, like a 4-sided die, all I would have to do is change the number that I'm multiplying by. Okay? If I wanted a different range of numbers, let's say I want all of the numbers between 10 and 19, I would multiply by 10, and then I would add 10, right, to get my my first number to my starting point, which would be 10. And then this would give me all of the numbers between 10 and 19. You can see that as I keep clicking on it keeps changing. Now, one thing to remember when we're doing this is if we want our numbers to include the last number in our span, so if I wanted, for example, the numbers between 10 and 20, I have to remember that I've got actually 11 numbers in that span. So 10 will still give me my first number, but I would need to change the number I'm multiplying by to 11. This is a very common mistake when you do an exercise involving randomness, is to fail to deal with that last number at the end of the span. So you need to be very careful about that as you're doing the exercises. But for right now, I just want the numbers. I'm going to change this back to a 6-sided die, right? Numbers between 1 and 6. And we can start to implement this into some of our games. So you'll be using this quite a bit later on, especially when we do our Guess My Number game in a couple of lessons. Hopefully this makes sense to you. Take a look at the documentation for the math class so you can see what other methods are available to you. But this is how you create random numbers in JavaScript.